Interspecies war is rarely decided with flesh and bone. The thunder of combat is endured behind the masks of machine. Durasteel and synthoglass, ion-shielded hulls and targeting systems linked into plasma cannons. The behemoths and leviathans of the void struggle with the splintering of metal and atmo-fueled fires. Crucial battles are fought in the cold outside of a homeworld's atmo. Theoretical strategists and historians project that ground assault will devolve into formality after a few more centuries of war, as advancements in orbital siege all but guarantee unconditional surrender. As soon as the physics of FTL data streams and the science of neural processor integration are cracked, the element of flesh will be summarily removed from combat. The CPUs and servo mechanisms of remote drones will decide war with no loss of life. Decades, perhaps a few centuries further, and the enigmas of true artificial intelligence will be decoded. Conflicts could be declared, fought, and resolved without ever a sapient life having to involve itself, and the Shriek would no longer have a place in the galaxy. Soft, meaty infantry for this millennium, however, is still necessary for surface invasion of homeworlds that will not surrender to siege and have the planetary defenses to repel close-orbit fleets. The Shrike are a warrior species, specializing in close combat and melee fighting, though not to be underestimated in any other engagement. Our fleets are strong and our tech advanced. But we are natural brawlers. Claws, horns, armored scales, quick reflexes, and a vast array of sensory organs give us an advantage against almost any other species. The species that match us in the aspects previously mentioned can usually be dealt with by brute strength. The Shriek homeworlds are massive and have gravity that would burden the lungs of most species. Adapting to our homeworlds has sculpted a creature of dense bone encased in heavy muscle. Not one to rest on our laurels, Shriek warriors augment their already formidable abilities with tech, armor, rifles, sensors. We recognize the value of artillery, close air support, snipers, and spec ops teams. Our ruthlessly efficient tactics have established us as high-demand mercenaries, particularly for planetary assault. Still, a warrior knows no such joy as hand-to-hand combat. Horn against horn and claw against claw. It had been some time since our services were required, and the Terrans would not even give us the satisfaction of a broadside line, instead turning tail at the slightest sign of danger, before our plasma cannons had even begun to caress their hulls. Imagine the thrill of war blood rising when we saw their dropships massing for ground assault. Our horns nearly trembled in anticipation like the younglings for sweets. We had fought them once before, on their homeworlds, but their sickness had driven us away before we had closed into full battle. They had given us a gift this time. They would not hide behind their biological weapons, for we could now counter those, but this time come to face us rifle to rifle on the surface. This was a rare occurrence indeed. It seems none had told the Terrans of the classic blunder: never get involved in a land war on a Shriek homeworld. Our fleets were readied and planetary defenses were strengthened. We let them land. We performed a show, of course. Anti-aircraft fire rent the hulls of their dropships, and surface-to-air plasma cannons kept their dreadnoughts at bay. It was a slaughter, yet still their soldiers came until their beachhead was established and their shock troops had dug into their trenches. Mere hours later, our stranded fleets began to deploy into their combat formations, threatening to reach the jump points and FTL lanes to our allies and remote supply depots. Terran orbital cover was pulled to position against these new threats, leaving their beachhead naked under the sky. Artillery rained hellfire upon their positions for hours. Our war chants and battle songs challenged the thunder of our munitions for dominance in the sky. When finally the smoke cleared, our tanks and armor advanced, forging ahead of our infantry divisions. This entire force would be summarily crushed, leaving no survivors. Sporadic kinetic rounds whined through the air and clattered against our armored vehicles. Inconceivably, a few of these Terrans must have survived. Our roars of dominance and intimidation swelled once more through the air, hammering against the eardrums and sowing dismay among these weak Terran soldiers. Apparently not quite as dismayed as we had hoped, the Terrans answered with whoops and howls, high-pitched jeers that rose above the guttural yells of our war cries. Their kinetic rifles slightly outranged our own energy weapons, so we held for a moment to organize our divisions for attack. Our armor opened fire, massive cannons impacting their defensive positions and hurling debris into the air. Infantry divisions began to advance, and immediately checked their step as a small number of Terran soldiers appeared over the rim of their entrenched positions, their comrades continuing to fire. Taunts and mocking boasts have universal sounds among any species, and there was no confusion as to the meaning behind the words and actions of these fools. A plasma cannon took one in the torso, hurling his remains back into the Terran ranks. The others continued their actions, seeming to take no notice. A few Terrans wearing strange, patterned garments made for females marched forward several paces to present their reproductive organs or waste orifices at us. Our battle screams dwindled slightly. Somewhat miffed, we called in another artillery strike. Sometime later, we again advanced, curious if even durable Terrans could survive such an ordnance dump. This time, the Terrans waited until our front lines were well within range before engaging. The leaders fell, personnel shields failing against kinetics. As before, another Terran leapt onto their fortifications. This one was different. His head was covered with a large furry cap emblazoned with a large five-pointed shape. One hand held a bottle of clear liquid. The soldier drank heavily from his liquid and pranced somewhat unsteadily down the earthworks, stumbling sideways to miraculously avoid 2 plasma cannon shots from our armor. We aimed our rifles, but he was still a few dozen meters out of range. He howled something at our ranks and began to contort his torso in his species version of a warrior dance, his hand disappearing behind his back and suddenly reappearing with a large anti-tank rocket clutched against his hips and aggressively thrusting toward our formations. Our armor reversed and we immediately took cover. Our biologists assured us that this method of firing powerful kinetic rounds was highly unoptimal for Terran anatomy. A few moments later, our overwatch notified us that he had been dragged back into the trenches by a few other soldiers. Baffled, we withdrew slightly and engaged our sniper teams while our artillery rearmed. The third wave did not hesitate again. Our armor smashed through the defensive perimeters, plasma cannons disintegrating enemy hard targets. Our infantry waves rushed into the breach. At this range in their defensive trenches, our true strength was realized. Terrans fell before our horns and claws, and we easily pushed them back and back again. It was a small thing, really, just a split-second slip in the strategy of our fleets. For a single moment the assault stalled, and the Terrans could spare ships to again jump into our void space, providing cover to land troop transport after troop transport. Their dreadnoughts bombarded from orbit, tungsten slugs impacting our reserve lines and artillery emplacements, heedless of losses to surface-to-air cannons. Our armadas swiftly recovered, again pulling the dreadnoughts from orbit, but the tide had been turned. Their infantry ranks drove us back, never mind how dearly we made them pay for every meter. The Terrans had been confined to their surface for far longer than us, and subsequently had honed their infantry strategies to a level known to few species. Surface warfare was the only theater their armies had ever known. Do not think us fools we could adapt and learn quickly, but momentum is a powerful force in any campaign. Soon our lines were pushed back into our ruined cities, around the entrances to the bunkers and tunnels that webbed the crust of our planet. We had thought that we were masters of close-quarters combat, but we had rarely faced a true challenge. Terrans were slow, weak, armed with kinetic weapons and using unshielded armor. They had primitive sensors and fewer numbers. Yet because of this, they were forced to become nearly flawless or risk destruction. Their infantry tactics were brutally efficient and executed mercilessly. They cleared block after block of our cities, despite lack of consistent orbital cover, a staple of surface invasion for centuries. Their adamant discipline and careful maneuvering assured every soldier covered his fellows. Every armor division had infantry support. Every squad was covered with sniper fire. Their strategies were like the scales of our armor. For all their skill, they still had weaknesses, as had any army. Isolating fire teams was an effective tactic. Before long, they would deplete their limited ammo and we could take them at our will. Energy weapons could sustain fire many times longer than even the most heavily armed of their riflemen or machine guns. And they were weak, so surprising them in cramped alleyways or inside buildings where our claws and horns held the advantage would let us easily tear them apart. They may have been a high-grav species, but still they were soft and slow, and we had almost cruel advantages in strength, in weight, in reach. Yet it was the things they did when they were not fighting that puzzled us most. We understood war chants and battle cries. traditions to raise the bloodlust in warriors before battle. We heard these in their camps often. Reverberating bass tones, thundering percussion, and vocal screaming from squads named after electrical current standards or handicapped felines. Yet when we answered with our own howls, they would reply with different chants. These were uselessly unintimidating. A song of celebratory aerial explosives seemed to be a particular favorite, and so many that spoke of posteriors. This species had a strange fascination with its own hindquarters. And their soldiers laughed. They considered everything humorous. Our observation posts and sniper teams constantly updated us on the antics of their troops, in which we grudgingly took pleasure. When they were not in combat, it seemed nothing was held sacred. They specifically appeared to find humor in long, cylindrical objects. Perhaps it was their lack that caused them jealousy of our species' horns. We overran one of their encampments once, surprising them in darkness and causing them to retreat before they would take the fight. We walked through their quarters nearly untouched, glimpsing the inner lives of their soldiers. Their weapons and gear were cleaned and stored, cared for expertly. We could respect them for that. Any true warrior would do the same. But after their instruments of war were cared for, their other possessions were eclectic and confusing. They carried pictures of Terran females, music players, books. Did they not have data pads? It seemed such a high-grav species was able to weigh itself down with personal items from their homeworld. We found boxes of rubbery material, too. The labeling had been scratched off and crudely redrawn as extra, extra small. My squad leader was able to stretch the cylinders over most of his arm, proving that it would surely cover a Terran torso. We tried it as armor, but it melted against plasma fire. Mystified, we sent several kilos into our labs for analysis. We also discovered something of their religions. They worshipped warrior gods as we did. Their gods also demanded blood, and sent minions to collect the souls of the warriors killed in battle. These minions were cloaked and hooded, fleshless Terrans that carried ancient instruments of harvest to reap souls into the afterworlds. Yet their soldiers did not seem to fear the afterlife. Indeed, they covered themselves with the symbols and signs of the demons. Their armor was decorated with their own skulls, and they injected pigments into their flesh to color it in fearsome designs. It does not matter how far removed a creature is from their ancestral beliefs. Atheistic, agnostic, or pantheistic, there are some things that naturally fill the belly with unease. This species' comfort with death was one such thing. We did not fear death, for we were proud Shriek warriors, but neither did we welcome it, and the thought of such close proximity with the symbols of our afterlife was an anathema to us. Relics and glyphs as such are to be treated with distant, utmost respect, not crudely scrawled onto possessions. It was some time before we came to a full realization of the last action their species took during combat. Yet when combined with the previous, it mixed a potent concoction to turn the belly to stone and blood to ice. We began to realize how few Terran dead we saw. There could be whole turns of constant firefights, yet when the smoke cleared and guns ceased their fire, our dead would litter the city blocks, and we would find mere handfuls of Terran soldiers. The superstitious among us swore the emblems and motifs on their armor and bodies hid them from their reapers, so that the soul-gatherers would think the Terrans were one of their own ranks. These stories made all too much sense. It is true that Terrans are weak, but they are durable beyond belief. It was commonplace to see them fight on with plasma bolts through their limbs or torsos. The only sure way was to destroy their brain tissue, as any other wound could and would be cared for. So much confidence was had in their ability to survive. Medical units would waste untold amounts of supplies on soldiers who would die minutes later. But for every wound that killed, dozens more would be treated. At times, even the most resolute among us questioned if the Reapers were fooled. The more practical realized that the Terrans simply would not leave their dead behind, so long as one of their number still filled his lungs. They would sacrifice all if it meant taking with them one body. They would abandon positions, waste limited ammunition, sacrifice their own lives. An efficient army did not do this. Although you could realize this intellectually, your heart would still fail as you looked at the piled dead, at your war brothers and friends crumpled on the ground with kinetic rounds punched through their armor and scales. And then you would look again and see one Terran for every 100 of your own. You could take position after position, hurl back wave after wave of enemies, yet it was impossible to feel like a victor when all in your vision was your own dead. And really, how could you conquer a species that laughed during war and did not die?